Corey Langsley made a bunch of quotes that are interesting. Actually, I was going to just kind of discuss them all, but probably just better to just kind of fly through them. There's a line in Macbeth that says, "What's done cannot be undone," which seems like a pretty simple idea, but actually is pretty profound. How much time do we spend? In fact, this is the entire left, right? The entire left is basically saying, well, if we got rid of guns, then this would happen. First of all, it wouldn't, but secondly, it can't happen. It can't happen. You can't get rid of them. They will not. There is no world where America is disarmed. And so to spend so much time talking about it is to simply waste your breath, because what's done cannot be undone. Whether it was good or bad, you can have that argument, but you cannot basically say, sure, would be nice if there were no guns, because first of all, it wouldn't be nice, but secondly, it's not happening. You might as well come up with a gun control situation, or you might as well try to deal with the murder problem in inner cities by making assumptions of how you would structure the world if people could fly. You know, it should just fly away from dangers. This is as realistic as this. So yeah, that's pretty straightforward. Julius Caesar, cowards die many times before their deaths. The valiant never taste of death but once. And that's been basically bastardized into, a coward dies 1,000 deaths and a hero only dies once. It's another profound idea. How many people are there that are so filled with the fear of dying that every day is robbed of joy or even satisfaction? How many people really do die every day, suffer the grief and the incapacitation of it, the crippling ruin of the present because of this dread of the future, and we know it's coming. I don't know how it happened, and I don't know exactly how anyway. I've mentioned this quite a few times on this show. I have some idea about how it happened. I don't know how I lost my fear of dying. I have no doubt whatsoever that if I'm in a situation where somebody's got a gun to my head or a knife or something, I'm going to be plenty afraid. I'm not trying to tell you that I'd be utterly fearless in the face of mortal danger. I'm not trying to say that at all. But facing that moment doesn't particularly bother me. And I don't know how I got there, but I think it's because I started to do things with my life that made me realize that I hadn't wasted this life, that I did something useful. And that can be, when I say as simple as, I mean as critically important as raising a good person and being a father or mother to good people. That's a life well lived. But I know some people very well whose enjoyment of life is limited and in some cases completely eliminated by the fear of what's coming. And since there's nothing we can do about that, it seems tragic. You do die 1,000 deaths, many deaths before your real death. For me, I think the thing that was probably the most effective in essentially getting rid of my fear of death, many people don't fear death because of their profound religious faith, and I admire these people very much. But that's not me. I just simply thought about it. Like everybody else, I was terrified of it, and then I just thought about it. I made it a companion. And I don't want to say I made it a friend, but I made it a familiar. I don't think about this every day by any means, but I do think about it often enough I think about it quite a lot in terms of the repercussions of it, not so much the personal aspects of it. I often think, okay, what is this American life worth? You know, never hungry, never cold, never bored now, no pain ever. Or if so, for just a limited amount of time till you get to the hospital and they pump you full of Dilaudid. And and living in peace, and go shopping in supermarkets where the finest food in the history of the world is just laid at your feet, and if it's not a perfect plum, you throw it away. And no one's ever lived like this, ever. And if we lose our virtue, they won't continue to live there. No one ever will live like this again. But what is this worth? In other words, people died to provide me with that existence. Many people gave up their lives to provide me and the people I love and the people you love and you yourselves with that kind of existence, that kind of Disneyland charmed existence. And so if you have any sense of honor or fairness or decency or compassion, any sense of sympathy at all, you certainly have to start asking yourself, what is the price for this? And so far, many of us have gotten through life without having been submitted a bill. But if you get a bill for it, if you do get presented with the bill for the happiness and the peace that we experience every day, do you pay it or do you run? And what that leads me to is a sense that if it's like the insurance thing in a weird sort of way, right? Everybody has to pay for insurance, and you can't pay for your insurance after your car's smashed. In other words, you can't go out and smash up a $30,000 car and then go and buy an insurance policy and pay $200 a month to get it fixed. And once it's fixed, stop paying. You have to. You're either part of the deal or you're not. And I started doing what I was doing and gave up any chance of working in Hollywood as an editor or as a writer, filmmaker, any of that stuff. So I get so excited about the Star Citizen game. It finally gives me a chance to use the tools that I have and that I've been wanting to use for years and years and years. But I gave that up, and I knew when I did it I was giving it up. And my calculation on this was very simple. This was right at the beginning of the Iraq War. It was right after 9/11, and I realized it didn't just apply to the now; it applied to all of the history before that. There are 18-year-old young men who are giving their lives, they're having the only life they ever had shot out from them. Never had any of the experience that I ever had, never. None of them. And they did this out of a sense of obligation to somebody that they didn't know. And I remember thinking, how base do you have to be afraid of, not afraid of, let me rephrase that. I think most people are afraid of it. But how base do you have to be to not be willing to pay that tab if it's submitted to you? I'm pushing 60. April, I'm going to be 59 years old. And I can truthfully say that in the panoply of human existence, I've never had a bad day. I've had days that I thought were very bad. I've had many days that were very lonely, very sad, and so on. But in terms of the life of people on this planet, I've never had a bad day. What's that worth, Many of us have to deal with the loss of pets, and it just rips your heart out. And it's just horrible. And one of the things that's worst about it is that if you really love your animal, you take upon yourself responsibility for their death, even though this may be happening tomorrow, a month from now, a week from now, when you have a terminally ill pet. They usually let you know when they're ready. And the fear of that drive down to the vet's office is very, very, very powerful. Nobody wants to make that drive. Nobody. And having done it 3 times with animals that I considered family, and 5 or 6 times with animals I considered very nearly family, all I remember of it is that the drive back was easier than the drive there. But when you're confronted with this, and a person who I like very much, who's been doing my hair for years now, just lost a dog and had to put the dog down on Christmas night. She had spent the previous couple of years every 2 hours waking up to get the dog medication. The dog was blind. This kind of care. Some people think, oh, it's just nuts. I admire it more than anything. I admire it more than I can say. I know when I was flat broke and I was really, really not having rent or electric money, when my cat Texas was breathing hard and I came home, I spent $3,000 that I didn't have to make sure that this was terminal, and it was. And so when you confront people, or when you confront this moment, this horrific moment where this animal that loves you and trusts you, you pick up in your arms and you drive down to have them leave the earth. You're the agent of their destruction. The two things I'll say about that are this: if you're not willing to make that drive, it's because you love yourself more than you love the animal. Your fear of the sadness of it is overcoming your love of that animal. You think you're not going to do it because you love them too much, but if you really loved them, you would go, because when you have a terminal illness, and that may just be old age, there's no getting out of it. It's not like there's a 10% chance. It's you just don't want to go, and you will not go, and that animal that you love will suffer because of your cowardice. So there's that aspect of it. But the thing I usually say to comfort other people and to comfort myself is simply this: when you have to lose a pet or deal with any kind of death in the family, friends, people that have been a part of your life, the thing I constantly come back to, just using a pet as an example, is this is what it cost. This is the cost. This is what the cost is for all of that companionship and friendship and smiles and joy and all the rest of it that comes from an animal, all the good times, all the great times. This is the price of it. It's not free. You don't get it for free. It costs something, and it costs an awful lot of pain. And to some degree, that will never leave you. That's a bill you're going to pay a large amount of and then slowly pay less and less, but you're going to be making payments on that for the rest of your life on some degree or other. You never really get over them. You never really stop missing them. It always hurts some degree. And so the question is it worth it? Because you don't get to have your cake and eat it too. You have to make a decision. Do you want 10 years or 5 years or 20 years of companionship at the cost of maybe 2 or 3 days or maybe a week or two, maybe longer, maybe shorter, of just plain agony? And if you say no, it's not worth it, you're trying to buy insurance after your car's been smashed, right? You've got 20 years of history or whatever with this animal and companionship, and now you don't want to pay the price for it. You don't want to do what you need to do, what you have to do, because you're too selfish. It's horrible. It's the most horrible thing I've had to go through, and that's an indication of how amazing my life has been. So these are the thoughts that go through my mind when I think about this idea that cowards die many times before their deaths. The valiant never taste of death but once. People with courage to face the inevitability of death are people who get to live every day unburdened by the fear. And my understanding is that Woody Allen has always been living in absolute terror of dying, and that's a talented man. I think a pretty despicable person in a lot of ways, but a really talented person whose life has been misery because they simply just didn't have the courage to face it. They just didn't have the courage. I'd known about the 7 deadly, everybody knows the 7 deadly sins, and few people know the 7 cardinal virtues, but it was only a couple years ago that I'd heard so many philosophers say that among the virtues, first among them by far is courage. That without courage you have no honor, without courage you have no generosity, no compassion, nothing. It's all based on courage. You have to have the courage. You have to be able to do things you don't want to do. It's probably a pretty decent working definition of it, or maybe do things that you're afraid to do. It's the oldest saw in the world, but it's the essence of the problem. It's not that you're not afraid. Courage doesn't mean that you're not afraid. Courage means you're going to go despite the fact that you're afraid. And that is a quality that needs to be instilled in people. And this is either done through instruction from wonderful parents or religious instruction, or in some of our cases, just a great deal of self-examination. Let's see what else we got. We'll end up with these. There's some other quotes there, and we could just do this all day. I might maybe either next week or one more time do a series of quotes and just talk about what they mean, what they captured, in the same way that we kind of got to the essence, I think, of the Hamlet soliloquy. Macbeth is also about pride, enormous pride, but it's also about madness, and it's also about. I'm sorry, did I say Macbeth? I didn't mean to say Macbeth. I meant to say King Lear. Sorry about that. Lear, I should have said the Scottish play. Lear is a madman, but his madness comes from his age. King Lear begins with him basically sitting around his court with his 3 daughters and basically commanding them to tell him how much they love him. And he's going to divide up the kingdom 3 ways. And Cordelia, the youngest daughter, goes first. She says, "Do you love me? You know, we always love me with all of your heart." And Cordelia says, "Father, you know, I've always loved you as a father, but when I get married, I'm going to have a husband, and I'm going to love him at least half as much as I love you, so I will not love you with the same wholeness of my heart when I have a husband to love." And for this, Lear banishes her. And then the other sisters, through intrigues and so on, all depart Lear. And so it's this, just the pride of it, that, you know, the fact that he wouldn't be given this tongue bath from the people who were his entire heart, just the arrogance of it, the cheap pride of it, drives him mad. And in his insanity, by the way, I think the funniest thing I've read of Shakespeare was the words that Shakespeare chose to put in there for that one paragraph where Lear is just simply barking mad. He just lists a bunch of things that are just absolutely unrelated to anything else. It's really, really very funny. But so you end up with this person who was king of England, out in the rain, out in the elements, covered in mud, and making a crown out of sticks. And the length of the fall, you know, the height of it is so instructive. That's what Lear does for us. Lear and all the rest of them. Hamlet exists, and Hamlet is great, and Shakespeare is immortal because Hamlet encapsulates in less than a page the entire dilemma of suicide, which is a serious issue for just about anybody at some point in their lives or another. Whether it's at the end of your life or whatever the case may be, maybe it's, whether it's dashing into a burning building, doesn't matter. The essence of it, all of it, is encapsulated in a page, a couple of lines, which we played earlier. Lear shows us how kings can be reduced to idiots covered in mud and rags, living literally in pigsties, with crowns of branches around their head, maintaining this illusion of their former greatness. And it's so shocking that for some people, it should be enough for you to realize that you don't have to be quite this proud, that this is how you will go. You know, whom gods destroy, they first make insane. Whom God destroys, another Star Trek title. I bet there's 5 or 6 of them in the original series at least. Othello is about jealousy, and the power of jealousy, and how jealousy is magnified by a sense of inferiority, how a sense of inferiority makes jealousy a killing emotion, makes it powerful enough to be murdered for. Othello's immediate discomfort, and then just plain agony, and finally his murdering of his innocent wife is driven by his insecurity, driven by the fact that he's a Moor. He's basically a black man marries a white princess. And when Iago puts in his ear the idea that she's fooling around, and she's not, it's the insecurity of Othello that drives him to this jealousy, because he's always felt not good enough, always. And here he has finally got this prize, and now the prize is slipping away because of his perceived defects. It drives him to murder. Aaron the Moor in Titus Andronicus is a villain who delights in evil, as I said earlier, simply delights it. He said, if I had one wish, I think that I would do 10,000 more of the most awful things I do. He has a line where he basically says he has gone to graves and dug up the bodies of people and stood them in front of the doors of their friends and carved into their skin, as if into the bark of a tree with a knife. You may think that your grief is over, but it's not over. He's basically dug up dead bodies, put them in front of somebody's house, and marked them with the fact that you thought you were over this, but you're not. That's just pure evil. But there's nothing like that in the real world. Nobody's like that. Hitler's not like that. That's metaphysical evil. That's the idea of evil. That's cartoon evil. It's extremely powerful and it's wonderful stuff, but it's not real, and it's not intended to be real. But the evil of Iago, who many people have called the greatest villain and antagonist in the history of literature, and you certainly make that case. The evil of Iago lives every day. I mean, there's I don't think I have a drop of Iago in me, not a drop. I'm not saying I don't have my faults, but deceitfulness and lying and schemery, I'm just not smart enough for it. I just don't know how to do it. But when you understand and you see the felicity, not just the mental ease, but the emotional simplicity of doing evil for your own benefit, either for personal gain, political gain, financial gain, or sometimes simply to strike at people and things you just don't like. There is much Iago in the world, much, to varying degrees. And if you get to see it all in one place, at its most vivid, saturated red, it awakens you to the possibilities of much paler shades of pink that go on all the time around you. For those of you not familiar with it, Othello is the story of a Moorish general of Venice, I want to say. And not only does he suffer from his inferiority complex, but essentially the play's about Iago. Othello is not in any way he's not the motivator of that play. He's not a MacGuffin, but it's not his play. He doesn't do anything. He is acted upon rather than acting upon others. That's why I think it's Iago's play. The whole play is just a really quite brilliantly thought out caper show. It's a caper movie. It's Ocean's 11. It's basically how clever can one person be, which really means how clever can the writer be to set up a series of actions that are so intricate that when they come together, you realize, my God, this person is is incarnate genius of evil. But the evil of Iago is an achievable ego. It's not the same ego as standing on the scaffold wishing you could do 10,000 more evil things. It's the scheming of somebody that smiles at you and pretends to be your friend because they want something that you've got. It's the fundamental dishonesty and falseness that is the source of so much of our trouble. You want to talk about pride? Iago is so proud that he doesn't feel any remorse. There's no lesson for him to learn in this. He doesn't learn any lessons. He's pure calculation. He's just a reptile. He's a psychopath. He's a sociopath. He has no human feelings at all, none. He's not capable of being redeemed. There's nothing to redeem. He's just a shell of calculation and malice. But when you watch him work, when you watch Iago at work in Othello, you will see how people have treated you in life, and you will see a very pale reflection of Shakespeare's genius in concentrating human experience. That's really, I guess, what it is. I rather like that sentence, actually. His genius is to concentrate human experience into a character, or sometimes even just a few lines of dialogue or monologue. And he encapsulates the entire transaction and turns the colors up so high that you can see its reflection in almost everything. That's the profound nature of Shakespeare, and that's why I wanted to do 2 hours on William Shakespeare, and we may do another 2 hours. I do like the theme shows very much. And once again, sorry for the delay in getting that clip up there, but I do love that, very much love that Ben doing that Hamlet soliloquy and as it actually sounded to the people in the Globe Theater. So there. I have Othello to finish. I thought I was going to read. I told myself I would read all of them, and I got about, 10 pages into King John, and then I realized now you can either live up to this little objective you set yourself and suffer through it, or you can realize that was driven by pride too. I wanted to be able to say I've read every play that William Shakespeare ever wrote. I'm not going to read every play. I'm not going to read John. I'm not going to read. I'm not going to read Henry the Second. I might read Henry the Fourth. There's some good stuff in there with false stuff and so on. And I'll probably read Henry the Eighth, but I'm not going to read them all. And I wouldn't have read Romeo and Juliet after the first act if it hadn't been so famous and had so many interesting words in it. Romeo and Juliet to me was such a very primitive piece of work for Shakespeare because it's a reflection on the genius of him in the rest of his career. The motivations driving the language are not up to the language. Hark what light through yonder window breaks, 'tis the east and Juliet is the sun. That's magnificent writing. But it's from a guy who caught a glimpse of this creature, and you just don't buy it. There's a lot of things in Shakespeare that you don't buy. I think it's Coriolanus where lifelong enemies suddenly become... Coriolanus goes to his lifelong enemy who he's beaten in battle after battle. It basically says, Rome has betrayed me. Now I'm standing here before you. I will either serve you or you can kill me right now. It's one of those other, I don't care. And then the guy basically wraps his arms around him and said, you have no idea how much this means to me. I don't know if I really believe that either, but that doesn't matter because he's capturing the dynamics of it. It's all there. And I think that will do it for episode number 175 of the Stratosphere Lounge, which is more astonishing to me than it is to you. So, if Dave Big Booty says, do you have to see it as a play or can you see it? Can it be seen as a movie? I'm very, very glad you asked that, Dave Big Booty. Big Booty, sorry. I would say, and there may be a better example, but I would say, for God's sake, go and rent or watch on Netflix or iTunes or wherever you can get it, Henry V. But make sure it's Kenneth Branagh's Henry V. Because he captures kind of the grit and the dirt of it. And Kenneth Branagh plays Henry V as he was. I don't know how old he was when he went on this crusade in France. I want to say he was 24, 25, so he was a young man, died early. And Branagh captures that, just the grit, just certainly the ambition, because there's a lot of negative qualities there, the ambition and the drive and the genius of him, but the charm, that's the word I'm looking for. What Kenneth Branagh has the charm to make me believe the Band of Brothers speech. So I would recommend that. I have not seen that. I just read Titus. What am I on it now? No, I just finished it yesterday. Titus Andronicus. There's an Anthony Hopkins version called Titus. I saw a couple clips from that, and I was amazed at how clear things that I just read were now that I saw them actually acted. So I would recommend that pretty highly. I saw Branagh's Hamlet, and I would recommend you see that too. I think it's probably the best Hamlet I've seen. I just don't like the Laurence Olivier stuff for the reasons we've been talking about all night. I thought that that what Branagh was doing was more believable, and yet the monologue he does stiff as a rod in front of a mirror. When I think personally, it needs to be much more of a frenzy. It's issued when people do Hamlet's soliloquy. By the way, if you go on YouTube, you can find 4 or 5 versions. David Tennant, who played Doctor Who, does one. That's not bad. There's one done for the BBC on the War of the Roses. Wait a minute, that may not be Hamlet. But there's a number of famous actors doing Hamlet, and some not famous actors. And I think the one that Ben did earlier is the best I've seen. But so many people make the mistake of playing Hamlet and let's just stay with that monologue, not forget the play and the character. So many actors and so many interpretations of it, Laurence Olivier and Gielgud and all the rest, speak those lines as if those lines were pre-written. They speak them as if they're written in advance. They speak them as if Hamlet has been rehearsing them in his head for years. That's how they come out anyway. They come out with a sense that all of this has been decided. But when you look at what the words are, when you look at what he's actually saying, it's not like it's been decided. It's not an oration that is given to the vapors in the air. It is not. It's not a cry to the great unknown. It's a guy who's wrestling with a problem in real time, and he doesn't know what the answer is. That's why he goes back and forth. To be or not to be, that's the question. Do I suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or do I simply off myself? Some part of me wants to actually do it and record it, although I imagine I'd find it extremely embarrassing. But I've often wanted to try, well, not often, for the last 2 weeks, I've wanted to try it in a, not changing a word of the language, but doing it with a modern sensibility, kind of a 21st century kind of a body language and a 21st century kind of a pace. People, in many cases, for previous ages, were much more stoic than we were. Good morrow to you, sir, and said, "Hey, buddy, how's it going?" And I think if you, as far as I'm concerned, as speaking as a writer here, if you use the words and you don't change the words, then any interpretation you put on it is legitimate, as far as I'm concerned. I'd like to try it. I'd have to memorize it. It's not that hard to memorize since you know so much of it. You just have to string those pieces together. It'd be fun. But that's how I would play it. I'd play it as if a guy was... I would play it as a guy who was speaking aloud while he was on a road trip or maybe driving to work. I'd do it like I would do it if I was talking to myself in traffic. And, all right, here's our choice. To be or not to be. That's the question. And get all of the emoting out of it and just do it in real time and try to get to the guts of the thought processes, because Shakespeare builds them in there. By the way, Something I never forgot. One of those moments that just burns themselves into your memory. And this is our outro for tonight. After which we will excellent. I don't know how he pronounces that. You pronounce that word. He doesn't say exit. He says exuent, which I think means everybody leaves. But when I was a theater major, I never particularly wanted to be an actor. I'd done some fooling around in it. And I had a kind of a comic sense, but I was not a good actor at all. I was not a good actor because I was far too self-conscious and had nothing like the kind of courage it takes to be a really good actor back then, or even be an okay actor. But mostly I was in it for the writing, and I was interested in writing, and I loved directing actors. I loved it. Sometimes I feel like I have something interesting to say, and I liked working with them. It was like working with clay. But I was in this acting class taught by a guy named David Shelton, who was the only person in the department who really knew what he was doing, and everybody knew that he was the only guy who really knew. Dr. Shelton had been stricken by polio as a kid, and he had a terrible limp, and I think that that never left him. That he was really quite a bitter guy, and really could really cut you to the quick. Many, many, many years later, I caught up and talked with him about this, and he said he was trying to do favors to people who he knew were not going to. I mean, there's some people just not trainable. And he basically told him, "You're never going to be an actor," and we thought it was so cruel at the time, when in point of fact, it's the same kind of kindness as taking your dying pet to the vet. But I'll never forget this. We were in an acting class, and it wasn't Shakespeare, and some actor up there was basically fudging the lines. He got it close, bits, fragments of it, and the rest of it he just kind of filled in. And Dr. Shelton said, "I heard what you just said, and I've got the book here, the play." And what he really said was this, and he points out what the actual language was going to be. And then he said the thing I never forgot. He said, "You have a moral obligation as an actor to get every single word right. A writer will spend a night or a year or a lifetime getting the words in precisely the right order, and that's not what you're good at. You have to read the words as they're written. The interpretation you put on them, that's yours and that's legitimate, but you don't get to rewrite the script. You don't get to use words that you come up with because you're too lazy to memorize the words that you're supposed to be saying. If you were a professional, this is what you'd be doing." And I remember being so impressed by that, just so impressed by it, because I'd done some writing by that point. I'd done a fair amount of writing, and it's really it. I lose my mind when people make the slightest edits to things that I've written. Certainly, if you get to be a decent writer, it gets to be automatic. You're not really analyzing it so much as this just doesn't feel right. This doesn't belong here. It either belongs somewhere else, or as you get to be a better writer, how about if we just throw it away? Do we need it? Well, I really, really, really like it. I thought it was really, really clever and really, really funny and really, really insightful. Yeah, okay, but if you cut it out, would you know it was gone? No. Well, then cut it out. And that's when you get to be big shot author that you behold before you today. In any event, that'll do it for number 175. And thanks as always for our members for keeping the lights on here. We are enormously grateful to all of you. And to my Stratosphere Lounge friends, who I just consider to be family now and have for many years. It's good to be here, and I hope to be considerably more focused in 2018. 2017 was a year of trying to find out what to do and how to do it, and I feel like we're starting to get that narrowed down a little bit. In any event, that'll do it for our Stratosphere Lounge show. You all be careful out there, and we will see you next time.